We're almost equally balanced here between the panel and the attendees. My name is Jonathan Zierdt. For any of you that don't know me, I'm the President and CEO for Greater Mankato Growth. And we've got a nice grouping of folks today as part of the discussion in the panel. And really today is about having a conversation about public financing and incentives available for business development. And the idea behind today's session is to just try to understand more about what tools are there. But each one of these three cities that are here continue to go through conversation with either the port authorities or their EDAs about, you know, what should we be doing? Are we doing the right things? Are these structured the best they can be? And I know that at least a couple of them are currently trying to explore what should it look like going forward. So the whole point of this was to say, if they're having that kind of a reflection, maybe they'd come together and we could perhaps have some discussion about it. Some ideas might get created or brought up. So that's what today is really about, is if you have questions about those things or you have thoughts on, gee, why don't we do tax increment financing this way? Or could it be structured this way? That's really what this can be about. We'll video and audio tape this today, so folks that aren't here will be able to watch it at a later point. It will be posted on our YouTube page, so you'll be recorded, so it'll be a part of it. A couple of other sort of housekeeping pieces for you as well. You know, whenever you're talking about sort of business development, you got a cadre of city officials. It isn't uncommon for us to want to ask a question about something that feels like it might be the same. Let's say building inspections or regulations or something like that. Well, today we really want to focus on, you know, these policies that a port authority or an EDA might be working on. And if an idea like that comes up or a question like that comes up, then we're going to go ahead. Come on in. We're going to go ahead and we're going to list that on the parking lot. So if somebody says, well, I want to talk about this building inspection issue or something, we'll put it over here in the parking lot. And if we get sort of through things and we have some time, we'll come back and pick those pieces off. But if we don't, that'll create a list for future conversation where we can come back to those sorts of things. So it'll be my job, if you ask a question that I feel like might be a little out of those boundaries of the focus of today, to just remind you that politely. We'll capture it here and then ask you if you've got a question more focused on financing and incentives and financing and tax abatements and things like that. We did have a couple of questions that were submitted as well, so I've got those that I can answer, ideas that people have, and we can respond. In addition to that, we'll also sort of take this in the outline that you saw. We'll talk a little bit about loans and grants, what those look like. We'll talk about tax increment financing or tax abatement, and we'll also focus a little bit then on geographic or business sector approaches too, because some of these cities have dedications into some of those areas. Now, if you don't know the panelists, I want to introduce to you and thank each one of them for participating today. On your far left, Wendell Sande, who's the City Administrator for North Mankato. And his partner would be City of North Mankato Mayor Mark Dehen. Thanks, guys, for being here today. Next to them, representing the City of Mankato, Mayor Eric Anderson, and then City Manager Pat Hentges. And then also representing the City of St. Peter, Todd Prafke, the City Administrator. And then next to him, a sign will arrive shortly. But the mayor had a conflict, and so he needed to be at another important meeting. So John Kwame, who's a member of the City Council, is here standing in and representing him.
We're standing on a piece of street corner.
I just drove by and
brought you along.
Jumped right in.
And Todd just brought you along.
That's how easy John is. I mean, he gets to go to meetings.
So we'll have a sign for him in a minute as well, just so you don't forget who John is. And so thank you for all of you for being here. This really is about, you know, I'll prime them with a question, but if you have questions or you have ideas or thoughts, we also want to get that out. You might think you're here just to listen, but I want you to participate in the discussion as well. No set order, no prescribed. They've all seen the outline as well, so they probably had an opportunity to give some thought to some of the questions that we've got in there. So with that, let's just get started. That first area we want to talk about are loan and grant types of programs. And some example questions that we listed is this first one, which I think is a nice one to sort of get started with, is what's good about the way that we currently have our loan programs, revolving loan programs, or grant possibilities like storefront redevelopment grants, those sorts of things. What's good about the way they're designed, and are they effective in their intent to foster business investment and create additional employment opportunities? That's really the notion behind those. And so it doesn't matter where we start. I oftentimes like to start sort of how we read, from left to right. So North Mankato, if Wendell or Mayor, if you'd like to maybe start and comment on that first question a little bit.
Okay. Well, loans and grants, we actually have 4 programs that are running right at the moment. We have a revolving loan fund that includes federal funds. And then we have one loan, the thin film project that is actually just state dollars, and then we have a section of loan fund that is local dollars, which we can operate with a limited amount of restrictions. And then we also have the sales tax fund, which is, in this case, the loans are specific to downtown redevelopment in the central business district. And we're also running a grant program there where a number of the businesses have taken advantage of that. It's a $1 grant funds for every $2 invested by the business to a maximum of $25,000. And if you've seen some of the activity in the 200 block of Belgrade, you'll note that a number of projects going on there and some really nice improvements taking place, supported in part by those grant funds. Currently, just as an overview, we have about $1.8 million in those combined loan funds, and we have a total, I think, of 16 loans outstanding right now, earning on average about 4% interest. So we're taking in about net about $60,000 a year in interest income. So the fund continues to grow and will over time. We think we've had some good success. Angie's Kettle Corn, probably the biggest single employer that's come out of our revolving loan fund. Actually, been a really great success story here locally, and now up to about 150 employees. Really doing well.
And when did you first get involved in it? What level?
Well, we
How
helped
many
them
employees?
acquire their first site,
Okay.
which is the small building on Belgrade, which they still have. And then when they expanded up to Northport, then we assisted them with the second financing at that point.
I'd just add, one of the things we're looking at with the revolving loan fund or the grant fund is we've used that to incentivize in the central business district, building improvements, those types of things. And one of the issues in lower North Mankato is always been perceived as the parking issue. So one of the things we're looking at doing is trying to use a grant program like that to incentivize our business owners in that area to work on improving their rear entrances and do some coordinated parking on the backside of those businesses. There's parking available there, and if we could get them to improve their entrances, I think that would help alleviate that problem. So as we look at ways of revising how we've used dollars in the future, that's one of the things that I'm going to push forward to try and get our business owners to continue to do that on both sides of the 200 block.
Thank you.
Yeah, Pat, I think I'll defer to Pat in terms of outlining, he has a much better grasp of the projects that we have or the capability that we have right now.
Well, I think similarly, we've had basically the same package of programs. Maybe there's a couple different twists in Mankato. First of all, our loan programs really are focused in two ways. In the what we call primary economy throughout the city, it's all focused in industrial development and job development. So we basically establish the loan very similar to the state in that there's so much per job is your maximum. Secondarily, and they always go up to a maximum of 400,000. Most of this funding really comes from three sources, as Wendell indicated. State revolving loan fund. It involves what money that was originally loaned to us. Some of it was paid back to us, and then to the state through kind of a pass-through arrangement. Federal, very similar, and then like North Mankato, we put together a pot of money that is revolving now. It's used really, as I mentioned, primary economy, job development, industry, or in our particular case, first job development in downtown, job development and job retention in the downtown city center area. We also have some grants, and the grants have kind of a similar source of funding. We set some money up years ago to do storefront rehab. It asked to be matched. Some of that money came from small cities grant programs and now CDBG funding. Again, that is targeted money. Most of it is for code enforcement and storefront rehab, exterior rehab. It requires a match. The one thing that we require with all our grants is what they're called as a deferred loan. So they're not meant to be a quick kind of get-rich type thing. We got some immediate equity into a project. They do require that if the owner sells the building, we require a payback unless he holds the building so long, usually in 8 to 10 years, something. So that we revolve money back into the program. And we have these similar takeoffs, but it's not really the focus of this in housing and some of those areas. But I think it's important to know most of the money is targeted either in the primary economy, if it's citywide, industry, job development, or it's targeted for the downtown. In industry, we generally do not do much grant pure grant. There are some cases where it might fit the program, but very seldom.
Thanks.
Thank you for outlining that. I think you touched on a few things. If you look at what's transpired on Riverfront Drive as an example, and you look at the benefits of the refurbishing of the buildings and the storefront improvements, there's I think a twofold benefit that Mankato receives from that. One is it can potentially help lift the business climate in that area. Secondarily, those are staples and staples of the town, the staples of the city, and those buildings represent a lot of what Mankato is. And so to see the investment that goes into those buildings, if that's encouraged with the storefront improvements, for example, I think that's been a win-win. One of the things, and Pat and I have talked about this a little bit, but trying to get my feet wet a little bit. I am concerned going forward about the availability of some of these instruments, particularly when you're talking about community block grants, which we've already seen some reduction in. I think there's going to be a bigger push to reduce that. Some of those type of improvement and revolving loans, it's good to see that Mankato has established already a set of dollars that's in there specifically for that purpose that we can use. One of the things I would like to explore is perhaps expanding that area from maybe from the original intended area to perhaps extend that outside of that area going forward.
Now, how about St. Peter?
City of St. Peter, we have a loan pool of a little over $3 million administered by the EDA. One of the provisions in our ordinance is that the EDA has to have bankers on it, which is a very, very big plus, usually, almost always. And that loan pool is mostly loaned out, various rates of interest. We have a secondary facade renovation program, which is much, much smaller. Our entire downtown is in the National Register, and so facades is a big deal to us, so we make 0% loans for 50% renovation. We have a couple outstanding now, but whenever anything happens to a downtown building, that money is there for that. For the larger ones, the larger loans, we made a decision as a council 6 years ago, a while ago, because for years the EDA had made loans that were $10,000 or $25,000, and they worried, stayed up nights, and couldn't sleep about whether they're going to repay their $15,000 or not. And we made the decision that if we were going to have an actual impact on economic growth in the community, our loans were going to have to be much larger than that. And so now we're making $100,000 loans, $200,000 loans, $300,000 loans, $300,000 loan, not bad. The restaurant. But taking the larger risk, we're not going to get a return that we notice. We don't do grants. We did do something unusual when we rebuilt 169 a couple years ago. The downtown businesses were all terribly affected. We set up a 169 reconstruction mitigation loan pool and loaned all the businesses up to $6,000 to pay their rent and pay their utilities. No interest, no guarantees, pay us back $100 a month over 5 years. And so, which they appreciated, and I think now every a month, they sit down and write a check to the city of St. Peter, reminds them of the wonderful thing we do for them.
You know, I think from the policy standpoint, John articulated it very well. We started to take bigger bites. We're lucky that we still have some projects that are very small bites, and that's important for us in St. Peter to do some of those smaller businesses and lower amounts of money. I think the strategy that we started to use, I don't know, maybe around that same time, 6 years ago or so, was to amateurize projects, maybe over a 15 or 20 or 30-year timeline, but we have balloons, so they're checking in. Now, frankly, that's, at least politically, it feels like that's come back to bite us just a little bit. And that now we have folks that are on a 5-year balloon payment, and because the economy's slow, they just can't make that payment, and so we extend them. That causes us to wring our hands a little bit and have some angst, but they're still viable businesses. Where the year before that, we would have just put them on a 20-year amortization and not thought twice about it. We still think that touching base with them, having that opportunity to have contact with them is important for us and for them. And so I think that's been a good strategy. I think one of the things we're looking at a little bit more in the future is maybe doing some guarantees. We've talked about it for a while, but never really implemented that. And working more closely with the bank and providing some guarantee opportunities. So maybe that bank that today maybe can only reach to 80%, maybe can get up to 90% or something like that, and we're guaranteeing a section of that. I think that's something that we still have to explore, but I think that's a strategy that will be worthwhile for everyone, kind of once we get through the initial phase of investigation and research on it.
Yeah, Tom, let's build off that a little bit, because as you think about, and some of you spend time either working with businesses directly, or it's maybe a role you play, and you just touched on sort of some of the things you're thinking about. Are there ways in which you think, or you've got thoughts about ways you think perhaps the loan programs or grant programs, are there ways they could be enhanced? Or are there things we're missing from those that maybe perhaps even from a legislative standpoint, and I want to thank Representative Reimer and Representative Morrill for being here as well, because maybe there are things from a loan and a grant program that maybe our legislature can even be helpful with, that help remove some things that you're running into. I don't know, so I asked that question from is there a place you want to go, or a place that, you know, some of you that are working with businesses you run into that if they can only do this, you need a higher amount, or go ahead, Matt.
I'd say, you know, we deal with both the state revolving loan fund and I don't want to, and the federal. And each of them have something, what is called Davis-Bacon or prevailing wage. And, you know, and I know that's an issue that is kind of sensitive, I guess, to say the least, between the legislature and the legislature. But that does have an impact on decisions that some of our businesses will make. And so, you know, there is, if they have to choose between federal dollars, state dollars, and local loan dollars, many of them will always choose the loan. And then the state prevailing wage is not as onerous, I guess, to some degree, as that what the federal Davis-Bacon is. So, in my experience dealing with Dehen, I mean, they administer both programs on it. They'll give you all the federal money you can possibly take because of the Davis-Bacon. And so that's just one thing. And I don't know if it's how the system is. I think there's probably some strong validity that there has to be some prevailing standard there and some performance relevant to jobs that it produces and what those wages. I just don't know if we have the best system.
We've gotten state dollars on a couple of occasions over the last 4 years from the infrastructure fund. And I think the only real problem with the infrastructure fund is there's simply not enough money appropriated to it. Money is obviously a problem at all levels of government at the moment, but I think the state, if it could see its way clear, putting more appropriation into the deed programs to help, in this case, infrastructure, I think that could really make a difference. A lot of communities say it's pretty tough to build your industrial park without some monetary assistance to help these projects go forward.
You know, that the infrastructure program is, I think, the CGMC program, and that has been something that's very competitive, and we've all benefited. I think you recommend some of that. But And that's an outright grant to the city to build physical economic development structure with some kind of requirements that businesses located here and produce jobs and located in your industrial park. But it's one that has been very successful for our, but that's what really.
I think unfortunately, I think there's only $4 million appropriated into it right now. So you can imagine $4 million, we could spend $4 million here locally. But obviously it's got to have some statewide dispersion. So if it had $20 million, then it would be a substantial.
Correct me if I'm wrong, I think that's targeted only for greater Minnesota. I believe it's there is. But there's the metropolitan areas that have a lot better ability to market industrial parks or have private industrial parks. Really would love to get their hands on that, but that's helped greater Minnesota.
Jonathan, I think one of the things that's going to be facing, and as a novice in this, perhaps I'm off base, but one of the things that's going to be facing political people, and I'm not talking about people maybe at the state level, but even at the local level, is trying to assess and discern between what has worked, which folks that have been in that arena know work well, have a practicality to them, versus what we anticipate the future will look like and the availability of those tools. And I guess one of the things I want to encourage everyone to contemplate and consider is the bigger economic environment in which we work in. The Fed's announcement last week to do the twist, if there anyone that hasn't followed what that really means, that's foreboding of some real problems here, I think, in the United States. They're trying to drive long-term interest rates back down to, in effect, make funding or borrowing more readily available. The problem is that there's no limitation of liquidity in the credit markets right now. What's not getting that credit to go to projects is what's concerning to me. So at the local level, we may be on the right path in terms of how we look at this, but I'm much more concerned, frankly, about what's going on from the 300,000 foot level and the impacts that those are going to have. I think a lot of these tools that we've had are just not going to be as relevant. So that's, at least from the elected official standpoint, that's one of the things that I think I'm going to wrestle with, is trying to engage that between what really works and what's practical versus what the future may hold.
Amir, do you have, I know you don't have a crystal ball, but do you think there are tools that will be relevant going forward that will work in a new economic environment?
In my opinion, I think that's going to be more something that the legislature is going to wrestle with. I think that our competitiveness, we're very fortunate around here. We all recognize we have some great people. We have a good standard of living, great education background, good work ethic. We're recognized, I think, throughout the world in the upper Midwest. We have a very broad and diverse economy, which focuses a lot on agriculture. We've been able to go through recessions and absorb hits because other aspects of the economy have lifted up. If we keep that game plan going, I think we're going to be okay relative to everyone else. But I'm more concerned about Minnesota's capacity to compete versus other states, as an example. And are the states' capacities to compete with overseas? So fortunately, we've got domiciled in this area a lot of people with real experience in business, people that have a worldwide presence, great faculty in terms of capacity for training and so forth. So I like our positioning, but I'm more worried about what do we do if some of these types of other programs cease? Can we pool together our own resources locally? We've talked before about angel investing and things along those lines. I think that's maybe a wave in the future. I hope we can explore.
Any of you have some thoughts on Representative Morrow?
I just have a question, actually. I think both Kathy and I we heard a great deal this year about the limits of what the government can do to create jobs, and whether the government should even be involved in job creation. And what I'm hearing you all talk about is, in essence, for the most part, job creation, supporting businesses that will create jobs. So what are you all hearing on the local level? Should you be involved in the job creation business? Because I'm hearing, for example, increase the infrastructure fund. At the same time, I'm hearing you guys should be involved in job creation, let the private sector take care of it.
Well, I heard something quite interesting last week, that, you know, certainly I think companies that do work in a kind of a worldwide international environment were saying what is important, particularly as employees and management and types of employees, is your communities need to be livable. You need to have good schools. You need to have a good higher education system. That's kind of first and foremost. But then I also heard, you know, concerns in some of these states. One particular company moved and opened up a plant in Aiken, South Carolina. And they talked about the incentives relevant to taxes and job credits that they got that was very important to them. But they said that on a kind of a twofold thing. I mean, it wasn't necessarily the tax climate, the real estate tax climate, but it was, you've got it, we're gonna bring in people from out of town, we're gonna wanna attract people from out of town. You have to have a good livable city, you have to have good kindergarten, preschool, I mean, they went through the whole gambit. But, you know, there needs to be an environment in a tax environment that can help us succeed. Not so much real estate. We understand real estate taxes, that, you know, they're necessary to provide these other services, but you have to have a good tax environment and a kind of a, not equity, that may be more important than job startups and all those types of things, equity financing, but a good tax climate.
I mean, I wanna,
Can I jump in? Terry, let me jump in on that one a little bit too. I'm with you. You know, we had a little go bad, and we've taken so much heat over that, and maybe rightfully so, maybe not. I don't know, but we take heat over that. I think that we have to fill in the circle, and that businesses need some assistance, and some businesses need it, some businesses don't. But we have to darken that entire circle. And it all depends on how that larger framework is built, what section we should take in. I think the public's appetite for risk has decreased dramatically. And there is less ability to fail. And when there's less ability to fail, you're going to take fewer risks, and you're going to be able to make fewer of those businesses go because you're not working the margins. In St. Peter, we often do our jobs. We are not the primary lender. We are not the driver. We're filling in that gap. When it's impossible for us to fill in that gap, Nicholas County Bank doesn't write the note. So that means the business doesn't come to town. Is that Nicholas County Bank's problem? Is it the city's problem? Is it the community's problem? It's how does all that fit together? So I don't know that there's one answer, and I don't know that the answer is necessarily more money, but that appetite that people are willing to accept has been a big factor, and I think will continue to be a big factor, whether it's on the federal level or the state level or on the local level. And you know what? This is complicated stuff. We struggle. I don't know about the rest of you, but we struggle to have people that have the expertise to be able to sit on some of the boards to be able to make very good decisions about this. When you have a positive impact or you have a failure, how do you explain that to the average Joe? That's really a struggle. And so oftentimes the light gets cast. Everything should be out in the open, and that's true. But most people don't understand it anyway. I don't know that that's fair, but I think it is true. Most people don't understand it, or don't have the time or want to understand it. They need the 30-second blip or the 15 sentences, and that's all they can really absorb. And so to be able to explain it and have people understand how to fill in that circle is a struggle.
I was going to say, anecdotally, we did a deal recently that the assistance that we provided locally, they had the option of going to another state. They have an existing facility in another state. And there's a real differential in terms of operating costs between Minnesota and this other state. And so the individual involved said to City Council and to the Port Authority that the assistance that was provided, in this case it was tax income, really made the difference. Now, we just completed another deal not long ago where I think our assistance with regulatory issues were probably almost as important as some of the other has been. Some folks are really really frustrated by the red tape that it takes to try to set up a business. So that's something that legislatively I think we really need to pass. We ought to have, I think the governor, by executive order, has actually made a change and said we're going to shorten the application period to, I think, 150 days. Well, to the average guy, that's still 150 days. I mean, he's thinking something more like 30 or 60, so I think we have some work.
And the other aspect on that I think I was informed about recently, I forget where we saw it. I think you found that data for us. While they shortened that from 180 to 150, all the ramp up that you have to get to start the clock on a 150 requires a whole bunch of effort now. So in effect, it wasn't shortened at all. Was this business perspective feedback? I think we got. Am I getting that right, Tom?
Yep.
Something like that. So he believes it's been shortened. In fact, it looked like you had a thought that
Well,
what we
you know,
were
and I
talking
think
about.
the thing from the city perspective, we're not the primary lender in any of these projects. We're not the lender of last resort in any of these projects. We simply are the one that just puts the final kind of blackened in the box. But there are, some of the tough decisions come into, what if that project went in Mankato or North Mankato, St. Peter, without these incentives? And that's a tough one that we have, and I would say a lot of times, likely the project would have went. But the test that it's hard on our elected officials, the incentives, can we direct them to kind of get the value added that was necessary, the extra jobs, a little more profitability, whatever that makes them successful. And that's kind of the thing we always struggle with.
And it's difficult to measure.
And it's difficult to measure, and I think that's kind of what you go through with, some of yours. I would also say that I think where the state can be, besides giving us some of the tools, helping the process, the regulatory aspect of it. But I honestly believe that there are incentives that both federal and state government can put in place to create the jobs, to get the small businessmen to make the risk expansion, to expand their projects. At the other side of it, the larger companies to, Minnesota versus South Carolina. And, there are some things state by state and on a national level that can make the environment better. And I think that's where our regulatory people in our state, our legislative profession could really have to take a strong look.
Your perspectives from 30,000 feet are awe-inspiring to me. My perspective is always from 5 feet. I can never get my mind quick enough to address these large issues. From my 5-foot perspective, we have the banks are the primary lender, and for years and years, banks would make noises that the EDA was taking business away from them because we would be offering the lower interest loans, and so they would want to take less from the bank and more from the EDA, and we were stealing the business. Well, credit has tightened, regulations have changed, and now the banks are going, well, we're not going to loan quite as much, maybe you should be bearing more of the risk. And we're sitting there going, sure, I guess.
You're a lot more attractive now.
Yeah.
People like us now. The second one is, as a small business owner myself, when I come in and want a loan to the bank, I open my books to them, I open my heart to them, I open my life to them and tell them everything there is. When they go to the EDA, it's a public body. And I have more concerns, more hesitations, more reservations, and other people are much more reticent than I am. And we do handstands to try and get the information available to some people on the EDA, but not the whole EDA, because it's the whole EDA, then it's public information. And I don't know what the answer to that is, I'm struggling with that. The third one is, if a guy comes in and wants $75,000 or $250,000, he's got to fill out a whole bunch of stuff and tell us a whole bunch of things. If a guy comes in and wants $3,500 to upgrade his air conditioning in his restaurant or something like that, we have to go through the same process. We think we would like to just be able to say, okay, the president of the EDA and the economic development director, anything less than $5,000, you write a check, you have authority to do that.
So when I hear a couple of things up here, I mean, I hear, first of all, maybe there should be some metered levels of how we respond in making ease of access to funding. I hear some things about a regulatory change. There's other things that can happen from the tax environment, and even the infrastructure piece. Is there a difference between having the state fund available for infrastructure where cities, communities can get developable property ready for business, but then they're not involved in the direct business once it's there, but it's made the landing strip? Are there places where maybe have we crossed over some places? Maybe we should go back and there's a place where the public sector should be and we stay out of the loans so the banks are there, but the city's job is develop a municipal park, or are there things that start to percolate up like that?
I would think that one thing I'd personally like to see is that there be a safe harbor for certain types of projects. And I think John was talking about that. That below a certain point, you minimize the paperwork. Somehow, enact something that authorizes that. I'd like to see on the federal level that a project below a certain size has local control, local discretion. It isn't a large enough project. Let's say it's $100,000. It shouldn't have to go through the same hoops as $1 million project, for example. So, give the locals some flexibility and wheel and deal to make some things happen. Because when you can sit down with a business, work something out and make it happen, businesses are more likely to go forward. If you make it into an extended 3, 4, 5-part process, they're lucky.
If I was wave my wand over, I would think at the local level, local government level, county level, city level, I think we should be responsible for assuring a good climate, a good environment. Our project should go into infrastructure. It should go into development, our money should go into development of the industrial parks. Really, I think ideally, I'd like to see the loans, the second loans incentives kind of dealt with more on the 30,000 foot level, the state level, loan pools, loan guarantees, those types of things. I think generally we all struggle with the feasibility, all those types of things. I think the incentive structure, the way it's set up at a local government level, we're competing against each other. We should be there to make spending decisions, have the resources, whether it be grants, to make the environment, the climate, good for the company. The state should probably be in there underwriting these loan guarantees, these second mortgages, particularly for the bigger stuff. You get local government grants for storefront rehab, that's kind of infrastructure development. And then, the state, at the federal level, if you kind of tear it up, they're in there to make the tax climate, the job credits. That would be the ideal, And in between that time, in between all those levels, you got the regulatory aspect of it that should create a little bit of uniform. But we've got states competing against states. We got feds competing against the, making it hard almost for the states, redirecting money kind of on a political basis. It just doesn't make sense.
I had a business owner say to me a few weeks back, and some of you I think I've shared this with. He said he asked, rather than having job creation incentives on the front side, where there might be a loan for every $50,000 you have to create one job, he said, what if the rewards were on the backside? So instead of any money on the front side, if I create a job and it exists for 6 months through the balance of the year, or for the next full year, or up to maybe 3 years, let's say, could I have some sort of instead, could I see a program where I get a tax reward, tax incentive on the backside? So it could be a deduction, maybe I get $1,000 off for each of those employees or jobs I created off of my tax bill. It's a deduction or a credit, payroll tax, whatever it might be, just something that says, once I've actually created a job, and I have the person hired, and they're earning, and they're paying taxes, and I could validate that pretty easy through my audit and payroll taxes and everything else. He said, could the reward come back to me on that side? Forget all the front side stuff. Just pay me once I've created it. I mean, it was a different approach that just said go to the backside, and I don't know how that would ever be done or where it starts, but does it change the conversation in a different way, Mary?
You hope that the business that they're in,
Yeah.
that's the reward. I mean, sometimes we gotta tell them, the marketplace is your reward. Hopefully you make a profit. The front side incentives, one can understand because you may need that push start to get going. But I guess I kind of look at it a little differently. When I went into my business 20 years ago, I fully expected that if I was to make it through all the bumps and bruises, that the reward would be longevity and a profit. What I'm more concerned about, I think, along those lines is if we take a look at the economy, the digression away from manufacturing. We still got some good manufacturing around here too.
18% right here.
Yes,
Yeah.
which is, that is outstanding.
Yep.
But as we shifted to a retail/service economy, many of the infrastructure needs in that changed. Take a look around Mankato here, the perfect example of the economics of agglomeration. Build here, build here, build here, create a marketplace. And we had 20 years of lowering interest rates, easier credit. We had a perfect storm coming together to have that economy come and build up. I'm not sure if somebody comes to me and says, I want to open a retail establishment, where I'm hesitant because the marketplace is not very good right now. But if I am able to hire 5 people and keep them 3 or 4 years from now, I would like to get some rebate back to me in the form of a tax credit for my success. Maybe the folks here that have a lot more tenure than me may say, maybe the thought process is early in the late 80s, mid 80s, early 90s, when a lot of these things really started to catch steam, was what if we give you the incentive to take the risk in the first place? What if we build you the infrastructure, the industrial parks? What if we put that infrastructure in place? Will you bring your large employer here, which will have a spin-off multiplier effect? I think that's flipped a little bit, and so to that question about the backloaded, I'm not sure how that would ever fly. I just don't see the sense of it.
Any other thoughts?
Well, I mean, I think you go back to the tax credit program. They have tax credits for housing development. They've had tax credits for energy investment and reinvestment. That process is one where money is put into the business and you get it out in the form of a tax credit. And so, I mean, I think that could work very well, and I think it's a staged process. It has a finite schedule that you work on, and so, I mean, I look at that, I agree again wholeheartedly that with Eric is that key to much of this is diversifying your job market and your economic market to be able to, if you create enough industry, you're going to have enough demand for retail and service, and those things will kind of fall in line. And Mankato's, part of why we have such a robust retail economy is we have such a strong agricultural economy beyond some of these things. So, it kind of, our situation might be a lot different than someplace else, where they're gonna have to kind of create livability. They gotta get a grocery store there, or something like that in a smaller town. Where they gotta have a nice environment for their service economy and their industrial.
We're like businesses here. One size does not fit all. And that's some of the tools too. One tool or 2 tools doesn't always work, and different businesses and different owners have different ideas about what they think is going to work for them. And the reason they're independent business owners is because, well, they're independent and they're thinking about it in a certain way, and that's how they want to think about it. And if you don't have a set of tools that matches the way they want to work, the way that they think it works best for them, they're not interested. So some diversification in those, and we do have pretty reasonably broad array of tools. They can always be better, but there are lots of different things that can happen.
I was going to say, I think one of the things here that maybe you were going to get to, and I don't know if this is something that you folks have seen elsewhere, but there does seem to be a general level of cooperation in terms of competitiveness, which I think is really healthy in this area. I've never had the sense that anyone was trying to club the other over the head, and I know you've spoken about this quite a bit, Jonathan. I think that lends itself to, like you said, one size does not fit all. You have differing towns around the area that have differing needs. They have maybe different types of businesses that they really rely on. We've been very, very lucky here. I can't think of any real large employer that's just up and pulled out. I think like a Hutch Technology is an example that could jeopardize that. So having these kinds of discussions amongst ourselves and looking at things, we're all looking at trying to save wavelength, I think is very beneficial, as opposed to where other parts of the country where I think you're going to see a lot more narrowing of the teeth as they try to fight over potential employers. I just think that's a real positive for us.
We started by talking about loans and grants, and you talked a little bit about some of the taxing types of things as well. Talk a little bit about your tax increment financing or tax abatement programs that you have, and how they've been targeted at particular types of projects or particular industries, how they work.
In our case, we've only used abatement once, and that was a targeted effort. We wanted to encourage a commercial daycare adjacent to our industrial park. So we used a tax abatement, pretty modest one. It's about $16,000 a year. But that was intended to assist that commercial daycare. That's been a real plus for us, providing that immediately adjacent to the industrial park. But since the 2010 amendments to the tax increment law, we've taken the approach that we're going to create jobs. We need to do it now. We're going to utilize the broadened ability that was created in the 2010 amendments.
What kind of broadened ability did it create?
Well, it allowed a greater range of projects to be financed with tax increment, whereas before you were pretty much limited to manufacturing or distribution warehouse. Now, other types of businesses, basically most types of businesses would be eligible if the local community approves. And we've taken the affirmative approach that we're going to use it, try to push things forward, create some jobs, and I think we've had some success.
We've had roughly 100 jobs in the projects we've done this year. And only one of those is a traditional manufacturing job. The rest of them have been more of the retail area, which would not have normally have been available as a tax increment finance vehicle prior to this. And so now, with the way the rules have been amended, we've had some success with that, and it's added tremendously to our industrial park. And look forward to that because those will be generating sales tax as well as jobs into our economy, which will be helpful in the future.
You know, I think our incentives in abatement, we've used abatement once for a larger municipal project that benefited business, Victory Drive development. The increments, tax increment has really been used with two focuses, and that was based upon the previous law. And it's pretty focused on redevelopment, targeted development where retail, housing, in our particular case, and industrial development is focused in a targeted area, the city center, redevelopment, qualifying redevelopment site. And we've held firm to that. Also in just general tax increment, it always has been targeted to the primary economy, which the previous law pretty much focused outside of redevelopment districts. The other evolution to our tax increment policy is that most of our increment projects always have a private site development component where the business develops, but we always try to use some of the increment collected on a public aspect, the infrastructure aspect, that isn't necessarily required by law, but I think our council team feels very strongly about it, at least over the years. You know, the new law probably is aimed at kind of broadening, kind of going back to the old law, the previous ways of doing business. I don't think we've made a decision on that, generally speaking, other than to pool some increments from one district and utilize them in a redevelopment district. So that's.
The law change did allow that,
Yeah.
allowed you to move some increment around essentially, which gave you some flexibility. If you had some districts where you had
So-
some money available, that performed better than expected, you could utilize it.
But I think our council's more comfortable with the idea that we target some, we look at primary economy, some of that increment always has to be used for some public use of it, whether it's infrastructure development, drainage, public parking lot, whatever.
For a lot of what we've done, we haven't provided the funding up front. It's been a pay-as-you-go basis. And our council's very comfortable with that. We've also used tax increment districts for a very different economic tool, which is housing. And that's been very successful for us. And so we not only think about business development in terms of businesses and jobs on the ground, but frankly, parents with 3.4 kids is an economic driver in St. Peter. And so using it in those instances has been very valuable for us, so changing the definition of what economic development is.
And that program, in my opinion, has saved from how they used it in the environment.
So Pat, you mentioned earlier, you talked about the livability, the competition between states. I had a business owner yesterday who said to me, what would life be like, and would it ever be possible for us to say we're not going to have incentives? Rather than say that we have to, and these were his words, rather than say that we've got to bribe you to get your business here, we're going to compete on the fact that when you locate here in our marketplace, you'll have access to some of the best transportation infrastructure. You'll have access to an environment that you can attract talent to that wants to be here. We've got a pool of talent. We've got a strong supply chain. And he just went on and on. And he said, why can't we? Because I challenged and said, I don't think we can participate in an environment where everybody else is buying the business and we're not. And he pushed back and said, no, I think it is the other direction. I think that we should be able to be confident enough to stand up and say, look, you're going to want to locate here and we don't have to pay you to do it because you're going to have all the best things here and your business will succeed, not because of a check we write to you or a break that we give to you, but because you'll have everything you need to be successful. Is that even conceivable for us to try to operate in an environment like that? Mayor?
Jonathan, I think that's what I was alluding to earlier.
Okay.
I think that scenario, as unattractive as it seems in our psyche from what we've been accustomed to, I think that scenario is not conceivable, but very possible. And I'm basing that off of the political discussions that have been going on now for many, many years that shifted after 2008 predominantly. And I outline a scenario where those incentives become less and less possible. And I harken back to when Jack Kemp was at HUD. And I remember when he was looking at his enterprise zone concept, which was very unique at the time, when he wanted to go into urban areas and basically take and create private incentive for people to take on a lot of urban blight. He was way ahead of his time, I think, and the problem was by the time that those things started to tried to be exercised, we found out they didn't have the resources then to do it. A lot of what we're talking about now may not, I'm not talking the next 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 years, but if an interest rate environment, inflationary environment, debt issues, and those things start to cripple, and we have the Japanese model of 15 years of stagnation, or perhaps even worse, governments are going to be squeezed, and public resources are going to be squeezed even further. And my point earlier is that we've got a really good thing in place right now. If we focus on retaining those aspects around here, if that environment does take form, we are going to have a trump card. We are going to have stability. We're going to have a lot of good infrastructure, a lot of good people, all those things. So that problem is somebody that's sitting in the elected official, if you're paralyzed with that thought process, it does enter into your considerations of what otherwise would be very worthwhile proposals. But, so yes.
Representative Brack?
I don't want to derail the discussion,
No.
but I sat on higher ed and workforce development the first 4 years in the legislature, and that's where higher ed and workforce were combined for obvious reasons. They're intimately entwined in terms of their goals and objectives. But we brought in some people from the university who, prior to 2008, were looking at this issue from a data point of view. Is tax increment financing a zero incentive game? Where do you end up if you look at the whole picture? Are there better uses of that money instead of cities trading businesses? And so you're saying we're not stealing from each other, but we know that's happening. And, between states and between communities, that businesses are being drawn by those incentive packages. And the point of view of the university testifiers we have is that if if you look at the data, you're not gaining more jobs or more business. You're shuffling, the chairs on the Titanic, however you want to talk about it. But, you're moving things around. So is there a better way to think about those same resources? And I'm not saying that's the answer, but because when you were talking about what the legislature did with TEF, we were actually trying to loosen things up to give a lot more local control because it's a tough economic time. That's exactly the time you want to back off. You might have goals that are better represented in the first set of TIF regulations, but that's not that this isn't the time for that. It's, do whatever you can to move business forward.
The grocery store in Sleepy Eye is important. They probably killed it at the time we built it. And that was a decision. The grocery store in Mankato or whatever isn't as critical because the market forces have determined it. So the only question I have with deregulating something to the degree or taking that opportunity away is that you still need the development of our communities still needs in some areas, maybe not Mankato, Greater Mankato, North Mankato, and St. Peter, but someplace out in wherever needs an incentive to make a business more successful because they can't put the infrastructure in. They can't afford. They can't hang their hat on an underfunded school district or what have you to kind of. So that's kind of the tough thing, and that's why ideally, I'd like to be able to say, these incentives are used for making our community more livable, better business, better climate for that business to be successful, and let the state, the feds, create the next layers of climate regarding profitability and those parts of that. But again, those are tough.
Is the decision made at the right level? One size doesn't fit all. I think that's very important. I think that both regulation and deregulation is at best herky-jerky. And if there was a long-term, finite plan that talked about how it stepped down evenly and it was foreseeable by not only us but by the businesses, whether it's stepping up or stepping down, it makes it much easier either to shift the game to regulate something additionally to provide incentive in an area or to deregulate. But it's very, very herky-jerky, and then that makes it a challenge. And that makes it a political struggle as well, because somebody got something 2 years ago that now I can't get this year. Boy, that's a struggle, and it's tough for everyone to explain and for everyone to deal with. And that's
Any deal you lose along the way, it's going to be bloody.
Yeah.
When somebody says, well, we don't offer incentives or anything else, and it goes down the road and it lands, a couple hours away, well, we lost it because we think that we can win without it. That'll be a bloody period.
I bet you if you analyze Detroit, the automotive industry in Michigan, they developed without a lot of incentives other than people buying cars. Where we spent a hell of a lot of incentives on the backside, propping it up and keeping it profitable. And so, you're going to kind of run into that issue too with all of this. So there are some needs. It's just that they have to be kind of analyzed on a kind of a long-term strategic basis.
Well, it's interesting, as you said, just to grab this and then back to you. if you were gonna go to that place where we said, we're not gonna have this anymore, could you do it over a 5 or a 10-year plan where you cast that vision and told people, this is the transition we're gonna go through? And we're gonna start to ratchet out of these, and monies are gonna go here, as opposed to just turn the switch off and say, we're not gonna do that game. Kind of that sort of discussion. But Mayor Dean, you
Well,
want to
and
add?
to that point was where I was going, and to Eric's point is, luckily Mankato has done things like Act 2000 and Vision 2020 when we've got that broader vision, and so it's helped our position our community probably a little better than some other smaller communities that maybe not have that long-term vision and doesn't have as broad of a variable of a economy as we do, which gives us the opportunity to maybe be able to stand out compared to another community because we do have a broader vision and have a broader community, a broader economic environment here that makes us a little bit more attractive than some other communities that we might be competing against in the future if you did de-incentivize everything.
And one of the things that's, I think we've both, Mankato and North Mankato, have been fortunate to have the sales tax locally. It's allowed us to do things that really will put us in a position in the future, development of the parks, Mankato, Riverfront Park, our park, basketball, the other things we're working on, become regional, in some cases national, attractions. Those kind of things provide the fabric for the community in the future that I think being your bailout, to transition you to a different level because you'd have enough cumulative resources that someone would come in and say, yeah, it's a nice community. Now they got good schools, they got nice parks, they got, good advanced staff, it's nice families.
There's one thing on this that we probably don't focus on. I may be at the top of the heap of the doom and gloom thinking, but there's a flip side, which is under that scenario, we may see really true robust economic activity. Whereas we are now backfilling coffers of public use taxes. We have full employment, or as full employment as we may have. Good careers, people will not be moving perhaps 5-7 times during their lifetime trying to find that next job. They may plant their feet just like they did here for decades. So maybe in having something in place that welcomes them and says this is a good place for you to settle and do that. I hope if it does come to that, I hope that we're prepared to welcome them.
One thing that I think Kathy maybe made an allusion to, workforce. If I hear one thing from the business community, it is workforce. We need people with a reasonable set of skills that we can train, and above all, that would come to work 5 days a week. Really, either don't come in on Monday because of the weekend, or leave on Friday because of the weekend. If I hear a single repetitive thing from the people in the business community is there are people out there to apply for the jobs, but they're not necessarily a good choice.
But the other one I hear right with that, workforce, is as the companies look around, companies aren't necessarily owned as locally as they used to be, larger operations, is livability. We're going to bring in a certain amount of people, and our philosophy are going to rotate through these various jobs at certain levels, and we want you to have a livable community. And we want, you're in one kindergarten. This one particular city in Germany subsidizes, well, they meant kindergarten, I think it was preschool. Their community happens to have a huge foundation that's at their disposal. But the thing, one of the significant things they put it into, preschool. Preschool development, kindergarten, no, they say kindergarten. States cover the school costs, they cover the quality of the environment and the preschool. And particularly, I think that's in part because everybody's too early in kindergarten.
Go ahead, John.
Kathy, you talked about using incentives to try and attract a company to come here instead of come somewhere else. I mean, this is zero-sum game. But if we're using our tax incentives so that the food co-op can move into a bigger building, or the auto parts guy can buy his building from somebody else, or the attorney can renovate his old historic building and expand his offices, or so that we can form a preschool task force and have a task force center push them into starting and then give them the money to get them going. That kind of tax incentive is a different animal.
No, I wasn't trying to make an argument totally against.
And maybe you can
It's-
define them differently, say what is good and what is bad, and what do we do to disincentivize this one and incentivize the other?
The stealing businesses versus the community development piece. Yeah, and it's, you know, who makes the decision, who labels the transaction. So I do understand the dilemma, but I think when you look from the, you know, a little higher up, whatever that level is, 3,000 feet, whatever, you know, for the state to try to understand what its interest is in TIF is a much different issue than for a community to decide how it uses that opportunity.
But, you know, I think a lot of this is, you know, we have these incentives, and the second thing is beyond jobs that help the local economy and the local standard of living. The other thing you do it for is tax dollars. But if you're tying up your tax dollars for 25 years, and at the end of that 25 years, you really can't use, I mean, you're just kind of using it back for service dollars. So again, that's why I say the environment, the structure, you know, whether it's a preschool program or a kindergarten, that's something that helps the industry. So I just think a lot of this is just kind of upside down, kind of mixed up at this point.
Tom?
I was gonna offer an observation, I guess, from the experience I've had too, working with some of the larger companies, the larger projects, and dealing with some of the site selectors that are involved in those projects. And they're not involved in all projects, but they tend to be involved in the projects that are shopping for the best deal and the incentives. And Minnesota's really not been in that game at all. In fact, something just came out yesterday, the top 10 were noted. I don't think Minnesota showed up in the top 5 of any of the site selectors that were surveyed. Highly unscientific. But, other states, you know, that have participated in that have attracted businesses that move every now and then because it's, you know, whoever's the highest bidder gets it. And what we've ended up with is, I hate to call them leftovers, because the businesses that have been here a long time, they know their niche. And it's not high volume, high production, low cost manufacturing. It's the other end of the spectrum. And that's not a bad place to be.
I was going to ask you, what scenario do you like better, Tom? Maybe it depends on where we're at in our business cycle, perhaps, to ask, but.
Well, having the tools, you know, like most of the tools have been out there, I think have been out there to attract. And I came out of the wireless business, so I used to deal with this all the time. We had programs for new customers, but we didn't have anything for existing customers. And that's been the game for the last 3 years. You know, if you're ready to move, you know, you wear a different coat. And you get treated differently. If you want to stay home and grow, you get nothing. And that's really sad to see. You know, you know, all of the incentives, both federal and state, have been targeted at new customers or people that are ready to move. So at a federal level, it's, you know, a zero-sum game if you're trying to keep them here from going overseas. But it really is, the world is the marketplace. And
So part of what you're saying, almost, you know, back to some of these conversations about differentiation, and we know this, right, from the data, that 85% of all economic development comes from what's already there, that adds and builds jobs and grows. So how do we get to that differentiation? Perhaps that's the idea of one of what you're putting there, saying, gee, could we be doing more in the way of our programs and tools that we've got that would be specific to who's here and how do we help them? And then there's maybe something that also is focused on, this is for new, but we don't have mingling, but that kind of what you're.
yeah, and I guess one other observation, just before things that have come up, not as a direct point, but as a subtle one. We have the opportunity to get information cities which all their people live in. And 10% of their population lives in St. Peter. 20% of their population is in North Mankato, and 30% in Mankato. And what shocked me was that almost 50% of it doesn't live in Mankato. I knew for larger companies that the number was probably more like 25 to 30%. Almost 50%. So businesses, are looking at it. Larger businesses anyway, are looking at it not so much which community do I locate in? Do I locate here or Illinois, in this region? And just that level of interdependency is always shocking to me. When I was at Midwest Wireless, we had about 30% of our employees that didn't live in Mankato or North Mankato. So this one being at 50% got me. But manufactured, and so they draw, I think, more people from rural communities and from farming communities looking for customers working with their hands.
Go ahead.
I got a question, going back to Wendell's comment on workforce. You talked about how they didn't have the right people showing up, and we have a lot of unemployed, obviously, in general. But the state has had so many workforce development programs, and you're seeing in Mankato where you have colleges, and technical colleges. Is it a disconnect between the actual resident and the workforce development programs in the colleges, or is it that that person isn't even ready to go into that entry level of the workforce development or college level or secondary degree or secondary training?
Well, I think that the folks simply don't have the skills, that would make them readily employable. And how do you get those people into?
But they would be, if they were able to connect with a jobs program. I'm basically asking, are we talking with people who can only fill in a very low skill job or are capable of entering into if they had access to a jobs program that would make them a machinist or a secondary manufacturing director, whatever it is?
I think there's number one, there's a shortage of technical education. Some of the technical programs have begun to fall by the wayside because there hasn't been enough enrollment. That's a problem of educating the student, the high school student. We don't have shop in high school anymore for the most part, so they don't get any exposures there. These kids aren't growing up on the farm, so they're not mechanical. And you get a lot of people coming in who really haven't had a wrench in their hand, and they're not going to do very well as machinists without some mechanical background. I don't know exactly what the answer is, but it's in the educational realm somewhere.
I mean, and that's true. Folks don't have those technical talents, but I'll give you an even more crass answer from a CEO a couple of weeks ago that I talked to that said, if I could get somebody, and Wendell touched on it a little bit earlier, if I get somebody who'll show up who just wants to work, show up 5 days a week, and can pass a background check, then I'd be okay. I mean, it was that simple for them. Yes, they can't hire the people coming to their door. One, because either they can't pass the test, or two, because, and another manufacturer, different one, who also said to me in the last month, we hired 2 people for this job. They had all the skills they needed, but they didn't want to show up. They'd come one day, they wouldn't come the next, and they didn't think that was a big deal. And he went through 2 people in a month. Representative Warren?
Of course, there's 2 sides. I'm married to someone who's looking into want ads every day. She can't find a job that she's qualified for. And she's ready to work.
Wow.
So I want to say that everyone's looking for work isn't going to be able to pass the drug test.
Right.
Everyone's looking for work. We don't find a match.
Yep.
I do have a question then for the panel, if I can summarize. What I'm hearing is that there are three legs to this stool. There's incentives, there's infrastructure, and livability. There are incentives in terms of taxes and grants. There's infrastructure, roads. I'm going to include broadband. I'm call schools infrastructure for a moment. An investment in the workers. Industrial parks, infrastructure. Livability. I'm trying to pick up on Pat on what you're saying. I'm saying that good housing. I've got parks I want to go to. I want to live in this community. And schools crossover, right? Schools are livability and infrastructure. I think we would all agree we don't have enough money to do everything we can do in infrastructure, incentives, and livability. We simply don't have the money to do them all. So while it may be possible, Tom, to say, yes, we are not competing with the top 10 in terms of incentives, but we might be beating them on infrastructure. We might have better schools. but they don't get counted as incentives. So I would just like to hear from you all. Am I seeing this correctly, that there are 3 ways at least that we might be able to conceive of this problem of bringing businesses and jobs to a community? Incentives, infrastructure, and livability, and all of you are making choices of where to allocate part of your money, and none of us have enough money to do everything perfectly.
Representative, I might add a 4th to that, because I think those are all things that people in this part of the world appreciate. Good education, good, the livability aspect. I include safety in that. I think that's a big component, a feeling of comfort. But I look at what's going on in North Dakota with some real interest. Their model up there is being invented at a time when they never tried to do this before. And now what they're doing is they're saying, in effect, Microsoft, come and build here. Others, come and build here. Look at what has taken place in some of those cities. They have really grown with a lot of big industry, big businesses. And then from there, we'll build up all these things behind it. So we've already got a lot of those principal things in place. I'm not sure that the answer so much lies in trying to put most resources into that aspect. I think we got to also look at the broader business climate in general, which of course goes back to some of the tax and regulatory things. I can't remember, maybe you folks, the 2 representatives will remember, when Tom Horner was running, did he use the term 40% of local costs were, I believe he used the term 40%, was tied into mandates and whatnot at the state level. So if you start and look and say, what kind of an environment do we have here compared to an environment of North Dakota, which really didn't have anything to begin with? And I would include that in that 4th part of that leg.
How are you naming that? Name that for me there.
I would call broad-based business environment, which includes tax and regulatory issues.
And a stability to it. So it's not changing it every, just the stability. How many businesses do we talk to on a daily basis that have a project and want to do it, but they just don't know? I can't predict the future. I don't know what's going to happen 6 months from now, 2 years from now. They have a project, they want to do it, but they aren't going to pull the trigger because they don't know what tomorrow brings. Just the stability is what many people want.
Well, that's one of the reasons that the largest bankroll or the largest cash capital that's sitting on the sidelines is sitting there. Because most are holding that because they don't know what's coming next.
But if you look at that, I mean, banks also went through the same problem. I wouldn't use this as an example of success, but the housing boom of the 90s and the deregulation, and maybe to an extreme, but the reality is it stimulated housing. Now it also had some downfalls in terms of all those other aspects of that. But the point is, it did stimulate, and it all had to do with access to capital. And whatever they did to create the private sector and the individuals to access that capital, how it went to an extreme. So there's something there. Not everybody deserves their credit rating and their particular credit situation deserves a house. Maybe that was the downfall, and how you can sell that later. But I think access to capital, which is some of that's deregulation, some of it is kind of common sense, some of it is insisting that our banks do certain things with their capital. I think is very important, and I think that's part of that stool. Fortunately, North Dakota, one of their success stories is you got a hell of a lot of oil there that seems to be booming this, that has given them the luxury of creating a better environment and backfilling behind that. But I would tell you on the flip side, what made Minnesota successful in the 80s, we had a good workforce. And so it's just one other asset that we could be successful with.
Okay, so that putting my cards on the table, Pat, to pick up on you. If I pick one of the stools, I'm picking infrastructure for public investment. And I'm including schools and infrastructure. So because I think it's the workforce. I don't think it's the weather that's bringing people here. I think we could tinker and try to predict with different tax policy, what lever do we pull, do we do angel investment or something else? But at the end of the day, I think we need to have the workforce that can fill the jobs. And so that's me saying, if I've got to put my money somewhere, but also recognizing no public official in this room has enough money to do everything they think they should be able to do or would be able to do.
Dehen does, he's loaded.
Absolutely. Well, but to your point earlier, and I agree with you, I think that that uncertainty right now, the TIF programs that we have in place now is actually drawing some of that money out because it gives them that little margin of cushion that they don't feel is in the overall economy right now, and so that's what's stimulating some of the things that we've been seeing in our industrial park. Is that you give them a little incentive, well, maybe they'll fall into going forward rather than waiting to see what's going to happen with the federal and the state economy.
You know, Pat, you talked about the stimulus in the housing market, which came because the capital was available in the secondary market for mortgages. Now, if somebody would buy our local EDA loans, we have loans that generate 5, 6, 7%, and there are other alternatives are 1 to 2%. If there were a market for that, we'd have more money we could be putting into pool for now.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think there's part of it. I would also say that, generally speaking, and look at, I think Wendell was on the point, is that we have this idea that we're going to have all our children. We do one of two things. You either go to a 4-year college, you try to get some level of a job after that, or you drop out of school at 16. And, this just baffles me. And you go to the discipline within the other markets are, okay, you go to college, you develop a trade in other countries, I'd say. And I don't see a lot of dropouts running around Germany, where we were, or some, the reality is there's a very structured educational environment and a very structured preschool. I think the education, the problem is to turn the ship, to right the ship. It's going to take 10 years or take 15 years to get through the system. I think it has to be an investment. The other part of it is somehow we think our infrastructure in a physical sense is so wonderful. Travel someplace. The highways are just as good, if not better, in Europe. The transportation system is unmatched in some of these countries, and the farm-to-market road system is better in these countries. We're falling behind, and that is physical dollars that come back to the economy. Road builders, concrete pipe manufacturers or metal pipe manufacturers, rail car manufacturers. All those are things we end up buying things from other countries.
Well, infrastructure is interesting. We're going to conclude here in a matter of moments, but if I just reflect, and I know that I copied both of you on the America's Jobs Act survey that we ran at Congressman Wall's office and sent to the President, copied you as well. And as I recall on the reflection, the one area that actually scored with moderate level of support from the business community was the second one about transportation infrastructure. What you just said was, and I think business people actually saw that could have some moderate impact. The rest didn't do too well, as we saw in the survey results, at least from the folks that responded in that survey. But it's interesting how that correlates to what you just said. I don't know if there's any last fleeting comment, either from someone particularly that was part of the audience, so to speak, that you wanted to add in, or if there's a last quick remark any of our panelists want to make. But we're right at 5:30, and we promised we'd be done by then. So just a quick scan.
I just wanted to
Representative Reiner.
comment that there's nothing in the parking lot.
There wasn't?
Even though you said we would exactly stick to the outline.
Yeah.
We sort of did a comprehensive overview.
Well, the workforce thing kind of took us a little off the track, but it was tied back to incentives, and so we just let that go. All right, well, with that, I want to thank our 6 folks that came tonight. Thanks to all of you. Have a great rest of the evening.
Thank you for hosting that.
I wasn't even told to be quiet.
I know.
At the city council meeting, that's one of my things.
That means you're telling me. You're going on and on. You need to button your lip up. Something I get bloody nose hit makes no so hard.
Something on our attention.
Oh, sure.
Jerry, Wendell. Come on, don't
Yeah, well, it wasn't all history that we heard. Thank you very much for covering.
There's a couple of lines, so.
$3 million more dollars. I think they're up to 20
No, he's not going to. I know, I think
They told me, I used it for years.
yeah, by spring. We'll be waiting for that for another year. Mexico or Hawaii or
Just gave me
the guys gotta watch the game. He was pretty hard, so always up for something.
But anyway, our end of it is.
Want to get a picture of somebody?
Jonathan invited.
Thanks, Jim.
Okay, now you're right.
Hey.
We want to try to get a picture, but I don't know. if
Oh, good idea.
The other side of your scenario, John, is the employees at the door who don't want to work.
We are.
Okay, yeah. You'd like to visit?
Coming back in town. That they're not, that there's going to be a trade-off. When it was $1.50 a gallon gas.
Okay, we trying to get a picture?
Good kind of St. James or something, but now that you got $4
You get a photo of everybody
I'm John, I think you're representing St. Peter's here. You too. Wonderful. Hey, Todd.
I want to be next to over the last 6 or 8 weeks.
Short guys are fun.
Yeah, that's us.
Sure.
Is everybody ready?
Oh, yeah.
Do you have it on?
I do.
Do you have the?
Don't have to be
there
quiet
is
for a
also
photo,
a
do we?
flash. Pop up that little thing on the lever on the top.
Remember when the Flintstones used the woodpecker to do this?
See you later.
Take care. I'll give you a call. Get all that out.
Maybe take two just in case we all blink. Or you have to tell jokes if you take more than two.
Yeah.
Yeah, we
Okay, good. Thank you.
Oh, you bet.
Just call me in the morning or.
Good, you're keeping me busy, what else keeping me in line though?
Well, we're getting some stuff done. Not all of it's easy, but we're getting some stuff done.
It's not easy.
Oh,
Democracy's
good.
not
The
easy.
natives are restless.
Yeah, I hear you have people dancing in the background,
Oh, we got-
sign language at your meeting.
Can I see you tomorrow morning, MinDOT? There's some planning meeting and steering committee meeting at.
It's tomorrow afternoon. It's from 1 to 3. It got changed from the original.
It did, all right, then oh, you're right, I will not be there, I teach.
John, do we have to
So
go?
just give my apologies.
So, yeah, I am.
Okay, well, I'm glad you told me though, because I would have been there. This is good.
We'll talk to each other once in a while.
Okay.
Great.
I like that.
That's us.
Process.
You know,
This one's really good.
Exactly what you want to do. You're living together in the same community, you have the same broad goals.
Not the answers were good to it too.
And, you know, the other thing that would be nice to talk about is some of the because at some.
So I gave you a shout out on Twitter and Facebook today, I hope you saw it.
Oh, did you?
Oh, absolutely.
yeah, I haven't seen it yet. Oh, thank you.
No one showed up as a result of it. There probably 40 people were gonna come and they saw me tweet about it, and they said, oh, jeez. I'm meeting with Dane's deputy chief on Friday, so, but she seems, excited about it.
Good.
Yeah.